Well, hi boys and girls, it's great to be back with you again. And Alfie's been looking forward to today. Yes, I know you've been telling me he's really wants to know what comes next in our story. Can you remember where we finished last week? David had just been made king by Samuel, hadn't he? Yeah, I'm glad you remembered. Well done, Alfie. And no, he didn't become a king straight away. He had to wait a little while. But you know, while he was waiting, what's that? Why did he have to wait? Well, because there was already a king in Israel. His name was Saul. But he wasn't a very good king, and God wasn't pleased with him. So God told Samuel to make David a king, so that he'd be there ready when the time came. But of course, Saul is still king. And there's lots of exciting things happening, and David's going to have some great adventures. And that's what we're going to be sharing over the next couple of weeks. Some of the things that happened to David. So shall we start? Has it got a happy ending? You always ask me that question. Yes, it has got a happy ending. Well, do you know, David, although he'd been made king, his job was to look after the sheep. And day after day he'd be out in the fields. And one day his dad called him and said, David, I want you to go to your 3 older brothers. Now, can you remember how many brothers David had? He had 7. You have been listening well. I'm really impressed. All right, yes, good. He said, your 3 oldest brothers have gone down with King Saul in the army because they're fighting against the Philistines. So David, he took some food, some bread and some cheese for his brothers, and off he went to where the army was. And the army was in a big valley, and the Israelite army was one side and the Philistine army was the other side. And David found his brothers, and they weren't very pleased to see him. Although he brought them some food, they said, what are you doing here? You should be looking after your sheep. Well, David, he just ignored it. When all of a sudden, a great big voice boomed out. No, it wasn't the king. It was a great big giant. He was enormous. How high was he? He was 9 feet tall, which means if he tried to stand up in most people's rooms, he'd be hitting the ceiling. And this giant was covered in armor. He had a great big sword and a big spear, and he looked really scary. And he shouted out, come on, choose your best man. Send him to fight against us, and we'll fight 1 to 1. If I win, you will all be our slaves. But if he wins, we'll be your slaves. And you know, Alfie, nobody moved. Now, King Saul, he was taller than everybody else. In fact, when he was there, most people only came up to his shoulders. So I suppose he was the one who would be the best choice to go. But King Saul wasn't going to go, because next to this giant whose name was Goliath, even King Saul looked small. And David heard this giant shouted, and he said, how long has he been doing this? And they said, every day for 40 days. Well, David said, who's going to go and fight him? And now his brothers got really angry. They said, David, stop interfering. Go back to your sheep. Leave this to us. We're the army. But David wasn't going to go back to his sheep. He was annoyed. In fact, he was angry. He said, how dare that giant challenge the people of God? Don't you know we've got God on our side? And everybody looked at this young lad. He was only a teenager. He wasn't that old. And he said, I'll go and fight him. Well, they said, we better take you to the king. And they went to the king, and King Saul looked at David and he said, this giant has been a fighting man all his life, and you're just a youth. Can you really fight this man? And David said, well, when I was looking after my father's sheep, a lion attacked them, and I sorted him out, and a bear. But it wasn't me, it was God that helped me, and God will help me to beat this giant as well. All right, said the king. Go on then, God be with you. Well, David went off. He didn't have an armour on, even have a sword. All he had was the stick he used to look after the sheep and a sling. And on the way he stopped by the brook and picked up 5 little stones, put them in his bag, and off he went to meet the giant. The giant saw him coming towards him, and the giant laughed. He said, "Am I a dog that you're coming to me with a stick?" No, I know there's nothing wrong with dogs, but the giant was just being a bit nasty. And David said, "You come to me with a sword and a spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord, who you have insulted." And David put his hand into his bag and pulled out a stone and slipped it into his sling. And he whirled the sling round and round and round and round and let go of the stone. It flew up, 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 and he went bang, and it hit the giant. It hit him right there, right in the middle of his head. And it hit him just in the place where he didn't have any armour. He was going fast enough that when it hit the giant, he went zbunk and fell flat on the ground. Well, when all the Philistines saw that their champion was beaten, they all ran away. And all of the Israelites, they were so excited because David had won. Now, Alfie, what do you think made David the winner? He was very brave. He was very good with a sling, yeah, but there was one secret weapon. Do you know what it was? No, it wasn't his stick. Shall I tell you? He trusted God. He knew that God was with him to help him. And that's why David won. And that's what David did right throughout his life. He let God be his friend, and he let God help him whenever he had a problem. So is that a happy ending? Did David have any more adventures? He had lots of adventures. We're going to talk about some more of them next week. So, you can't wait? No. Okay, we'll have another bit of David's story next week. But for now, bye boys and girls.